am Margaret Hayes, 70 years old, and tonight something happened that changed the way I see myself. I was standing in my dining room, spoon in hand, the smell of vanilla pudding filling the air, when the words hit me, words I never expected from my daughter-in-law. Lauren. She made it clear in a single sentence that I wasn't even half the woman her mother was. I froze. My heart pounded, yet I tried to keep my hand steady over the pudding. The crystal glasses reflected the soft light of the chandelier, and the silverware gleamed as if mocking the silence that had settled across the table. I could feel the tension radiating from Daniel, my son, his fingers tapping nervously against his phone, avoiding my eyes. I had spent hours preparing this meal, hoping for peace and laughter, trying to honor family traditions and make everyone feel welcome. Yet all I received was a sharp reminder of how invisible I had become in my own home. In that moment, I realized how much I had carried silently for years financially, emotionally, physically, and how much of it had gone unnoticed. I thought about the life I had lived, decades spent as a seamstress, hands calloused from years of sewing, patching, and creating comfort for others. I had always believed that helping my family was a form of love, that sacrifice was proof of devotion. But standing there, I understood something new. Sometimes, love without boundaries can quietly erase you, leaving only the expectation of more. And yet, there was a spark within me that refused to be extinguished. I could feel it rising, a steady determination I hadn't sensed in years. This was more than hurt, it was clarity. And in that quiet, charged moment, I made a silent promise to myself: no longer would I be invisible. No longer would I let silence or politeness mask my truth. Something had shifted, and I didn't yet know how. But I sensed that tonight, everything was about to change. I had no idea that this confrontation would not only reveal hidden truths about Daniel and Lauren, but also set me on a path I never imagined, a path where, at 70, I could finally choose myself. And as I looked at the pudding on the table, the room so familiar yet strangely alien, I knew the first step of that journey was right here, in this quiet, tension-filled dining room. I have lived in the same small Ohio town for more than 30 years, a widow who had always believed that devotion meant quiet sacrifice. For decades, I worked as a seamstress, my hands rough and tired from stitching, hemming, and mending, often for neighbors who could barely pay in cash, but offered gratitude instead. Each dress, each patch, each stitch was my way of giving, a silent proof of care. I had spent my life nurturing Daniel, my only son, believing that helping him in every way possible was the truest expression of love. I remember the day he came to me with desperation in his eyes, explaining that he had lost his job and that the rent was overdue. My heart had clenched at the thought of him struggling, of him feeling embarrassed or defeated. I opened my savings account, counting each penny I had tucked away for years, and quietly began covering their apartment. $900 each month, plus an extra $100 for the landlord's transfer fee, every 5th day. I emptied my account to keep them afloat. Daniel had asked me to keep it a secret from Lauren, and I had trusted him, believing it was about protecting her pride. To make the payments, I stretched my own needs to the limit. Meals became simple, sometimes just rice and eggs. I delayed taking my arthritis medication, ignoring the aches that sometimes kept me awake at night. My shoes wore thin, the soles splitting under my weight. Yet I convinced myself it was worth it. I told myself that my sacrifice was temporary, that one day, Daniel and Lauren would see what I had done and appreciate it. I didn't realize then how quietly invisible I had become in my own home, how the very act of giving had allowed others to take me for granted. I would watch from the kitchen window as they enjoyed dinners out, bought new clothes, and shared weekend trips on social media, knowing I could not afford such luxuries for myself. And still, I carried their burden silently, convincing myself that love required endurance and patience. I imagined that if I could make the apartment comfortable for them, all would be well, and maybe Daniel would feel relief. Maybe Lauren would feel gratitude. This life of quiet sacrifice shaped me, but it also isolated me in ways I didn't notice. My home, filled with decades of memories, the rocking chair where I nursed Daniel through fevers, the quilt stitched from leftover fabrics. Every square a story of care had become a place of silent endurance. For years, I had equated my worth with my usefulness, never questioning the balance between giving and being seen. And yet, even as I prepared that evening's dinner, Daniel's favorite chicken and mushroom sauce, rice with vegetables, and the vanilla pudding he loved since childhood, I felt the tension building. I wanted one peaceful meal, one moment of connection. But I sensed that the evening might not unfold as I had imagined. There was something in Lauren's red dress, in Daniel's avoidance of my gaze, that hinted a storm was coming. It was in that quiet anticipation that I realized life had been quietly pressing me down for years, teaching me patience, teaching me invisibility, and, unknowingly, preparing me for the moment I would finally reclaim my voice. That evening, I carefully set the table, polishing the silverware until it gleamed, laying out the crystal glasses I had inherited from my mother. I wanted everything to feel warm and welcoming, a small oasis of peace in a life that had long been filled with silent compromises. The chicken and mushroom sauce simmered on the stove, rice and vegetables ready, and the vanilla pudding waiting to be served last, hoping to soften the evening. I held on to the memory of Daniel scraping that same pudding bowl as a boy, telling me I was the best cook in the world. When Lauren arrived, she wore a red dress that probably cost more than my entire grocery bill for the month. There was an air of confidence about her, the kind that made you feel unseen even when she glanced in your direction. Daniel seemed restless, avoiding my eyes, fiddling with his phone like it held answers to questions I wasn't meant to ask. I reminded myself to breathe, to focus on the evening I had planned, even though a quiet storm was gathering in the room. Lauren began her subtle critique, noticing small imperfections in the meal and the room. She compared our home to her mother's, praised styles I hadn't updated in decades, and I felt the familiar sting of being diminished. I tried to keep my smile soft, to remain the gracious host I had always strived to be, but the words landed with a weight I could not ignore, each one punctuating the silence with the sharpness of a blade. As dessert approached, I carried the pudding to the table, trying to remember the joy Daniel had once expressed over it. I wanted laughter, a peaceful end to the evening. But as soon as Lauren leaned back, there it was, the sentence that cut through the air and settled into my chest, telling me I wasn't even half the woman her mother was. I could feel my hands still over the pudding, frozen in place, the room holding its breath. Daniel's gaze stayed down, his shoulders tense, and in that moment, I realized this was the culmination of months, maybe years, of hidden truths and unspoken frustrations. I felt a quiet, steady anger rising, a determination I hadn't acknowledged in myself for decades. I reminded myself that I was not just a provider or a caretaker. I was a woman who had given everything, and it was time to be seen. For the first time in years, I didn't retreat, didn't soften, didn't pretend that the words didn't hurt. Instead, I let the silence carry the weight of what I had endured, the quiet tension building into something inevitable. This is when I knew I had to speak, not with cruelty, not with anger that could harm, but with clarity and authority that only comes from truth. The stage was set for the revelation I had been holding within me, the moment that would not only change how Daniel and Lauren saw me, but would mark the first step of reclaiming my own life. And as I lifted my chair, my heart pounding, I could feel the shift in the air. The room was waiting for what was to come. The confrontation was inevitable, and I knew that after this, nothing would ever feel the same. I placed the spoon carefully on the table and stood up, feeling a calmness that surprised me. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to speak without bending, without softening, without worrying about pleasing anyone else. I let Daniel and Lauren feel the weight of my silence before I finally let the truth surface. I told myself, quietly but firmly, that the months of secret sacrifices could no longer be invisible. I revealed that I had been paying their apartment rent every month since February, $900 for rent plus $100 for the landlord's processing fee. $1,000 faithfully sent so they could live comfortably. Daniel's reaction was immediate. His head snapped up, shock overtaking the usual defensiveness, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. And Lauren, the one who had scorned me moments ago, froze in confusion. Her carefully curated composure faltered, and I realized that for the first time, she did not control the room. I felt a strange mixture of relief and power, not in a vengeful way, but in the clarity of finally being acknowledged. Years of bending and compromising had left me invisible, but now my voice carried weight. I reminded myself that this was not about punishment. It was about boundaries, about finally taking care of myself. The truth hung in the air, heavy yet liberating, and I could feel the shift in the energy of the room. Lauren's confidence collapsed as Daniel's own shame became visible. He admitted, finally, that he had been fired 2 weeks earlier, but had not told me, choosing instead to let me continue covering the rent. And just like that, the careful balance they had maintained the illusion that I was unaware. The sense of entitlement they carried was gone. In that moment, the power dynamic changed. I was no longer merely the mother or caretaker. I was the one who held the truth, the one who decided the next steps. I reminded myself that love does not require invisibility. My chest ached not with pity, but with an old anger renewed. I sold Daniel and Lauren the reality that the lease was up in 30 days and that I would no longer cover a single cent. Promises no longer counted. Actions counted. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of expectations sliding off my shoulders, replaced by a steadiness I had long forgotten. The room remained silent, the air thick with the lessons of unspoken months, of sacrifices unnoticed. And as I watched their expressions shock, guilt, confusion, I realized that I was no longer defined by their needs or their missteps. This was a turning point, a moment where everything I had endured transformed into clarity, where the path forward was mine to choose. In that silence, I felt both the end of a chapter and the first spark of a new one in which my choices, my happiness, and my life could finally belong to me. This confrontation was over, but the journey it set in motion was only beginning, leading me towards self-discovery, healing, and the chance to embrace a life I had long put aside. In the days that followed, a quiet shift began to unfold in my life. 2 days after the confrontation, I received a call that pulled me back decades, a voice I had not heard in 50 years. It was Tom, my college sweetheart, the boy with the crooked smile who once promised me the Pacific Ocean. Hearing his voice brought a rush of memories, of hope, of the youthful dreams I had put aside while raising a family and sacrificing for others. He spoke gently, telling me about his life in Seattle, the years spent building a company, and the losses he had endured. Then, unexpectedly, he invited me to spend a month with him, no expectations. Just the chance to reconnect, to step outside the routine I had lived for so long. I hesitated at first. 70 years old, I reminded myself, with a life built on responsibility and care for others. What if this was foolish? What if the person I remembered had changed? But as I reflected, I realized that for the first time in decades, the decision was not about anyone else. It was about me. I had spent a lifetime giving, sacrificing, and shrinking myself to accommodate others. And now, finally, I could choose to explore happiness on my own terms. Around the same time, Daniel returned, more humble and weary than I had ever seen him. He admitted to sleeping in his car, working night shifts, and beginning online courses to rebuild his life. There was a vulnerability in his voice, an acceptance of responsibility he had long avoided. I could see the flicker of hope in him, fragile but real. It reminded me that change, even after years of missteps, was possible. I realized that my act of setting boundaries had not only freed me, but had given him the chance to stand on his own 2 feet. Packing for Seattle, I felt a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet liberation. Each dress I folded into my suitcase was a small act of reclaiming myself. Daniel handed me a small bouquet of daisies and a letter, urging me to embrace this journey fully, to remember that I had earned joy and freedom. And as I boarded the plane, gazing at the clouds stretching endlessly below, I felt a sense of lightness I had not known in years. Arriving in Seattle, Tom greeted me with warmth and familiarity, and for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to be fully present, fully appreciated, fully alive. We walked along the Pacific coast, sharing stories and laughter, and I felt the gentle unfolding of a new chapter. In every conversation, in every quiet sunrise, I began to understand that life could still surprise me, that happiness was not a gift to be given, but a choice to embrace. Looking back now, I see clearly the lessons that came from those intense, transformative weeks. I learned that unconditional love, while powerful, must be balanced with boundaries. Being a mother does not mean losing yourself or allowing others to take advantage of your kindness. True love includes respect, honesty, and accountability, even when it is difficult to enforce. Daniel has begun to rebuild his life. He works steadily, pays his bills, and has even started forming healthier relationships that encourage him rather than enable his old habits. Watching him grow has brought a quiet pride I had not expected, a recognition that letting go and standing firm can create change in those we care about. As for Lauren, she chose her own path, one that did not involve me, and I realized that some people will never change, and that is their journey, not mine. For myself, I finally embraced the joy and freedom I had postponed for decades. Traveling to Seattle, reconnecting with Tom, and experiencing the Pacific coast reminded me that happiness is not a gift to be given. It is a choice we must actively make for ourselves. Every sunset, every conversation, every quiet moment of reflection was a reminder that life continues to offer new chapters. Even after 70 years, I think about those of you listening, wondering if you, too, have spent too much time making yourself invisible for the sake of others. Perhaps you have allowed obligations or guilt to limit your own happiness. I want you to hear this clearly. It is never too late to choose yourself. You are never too old, too late, or too small to reclaim your voice, to set boundaries, and to embrace the life you deserve. As I sit on the porch overlooking the ocean, I realize that opening this chapter was not about revenge or anger. It was about respect, freedom, and the courage to live authentically. I hope that my story encourages you to consider where you might be sacrificing yourself unnecessarily, and to take the first step toward honoring your own worth. If my story resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts, reflect on your own boundaries, and consider how you might choose yourself today. Life may not always unfold as we expect, but there is always the opportunity to stand tall, speak our truth, and embrace the happiness that we have earned.